Denise Carter stood outside the front entrance of the factory she owned. The white security guard looked her up and down, smirking. "Back door is for cleaning staff," he said. "Wait here." 40 minutes later, 13 members of the executive team would lose their jobs. But none of them knew that. Not yet. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your city and country in the comments below. If you believe that justice always finds a way, hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this. Now, let us see what happens when assumptions meet reality. Denise Carter did not grow up with silver spoons or trust funds. She came from the south side of Chicago, one of the toughest neighborhoods in America, where dreams often died before they had a chance to breathe. Her mother, Lorraine Carter, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table for her 4 children. She cleaned offices during the day, waited tables in the evening, and took in laundry on weekends. Sleep was a luxury Lorraine could rarely afford, but she never complained. She told her children that hard work was the only currency that never lost its value. Denise watched her mother come home with swollen feet and calloused hands, yet still find the energy to help with homework and whisper words of encouragement before bed. That woman was her first hero, her blueprint for resilience. Her father walked out when Denise was 5 years old. One morning he was there, drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and by evening, his closet was empty and his side of the bed was cold. He left no note, no explanation, no forwarding address. Lorraine never spoke ill of him in front of the children, but Denise saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the way she would pause sometimes while folding laundry, lost in memories that hurt too much to share. Growing up without a father taught Denise early that she could only count on herself. It made her fierce. It made her hungry. It made her determined to never be abandoned or overlooked again. Education became her escape route. While other kids played in the streets, Denise buried herself in books at the local library. She devoured everything she could find about business, economics, and leadership. Her teachers noticed her brilliance and pushed her to aim higher than anyone from her neighborhood had ever aimed before. When she was 17, she received a letter that changed everything. Northwestern University offered her a full academic scholarship. Lorraine cried for 3 hours straight when she heard the news, tears of joy mixed with disbelief that her daughter was going to attend one of the finest universities in the country. Denise became the first person in her family to graduate from college, and she did it with honors. But she did not stop there. After Northwestern, she earned her MBA from Harvard Business School, competing against students who had been groomed for success since birth. They had connections, legacy admissions, and family businesses waiting for them. Denise had nothing but her mind and her work ethic, and that proved to be enough. She graduated in the top 10% of her class and immediately started climbing corporate ladders that were never designed for women who looked like her. She started as an intern at a small manufacturing company in Detroit, making barely enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. But she worked 18 hours a day, learning every aspect of the business from the factory floor to the executive suite. She saved every penny she could, knowing that one day she would need capital to make her move. At 28, she founded her own consulting firm, helping struggling companies restructure and find profitability. By 35, she had saved enough to buy her first manufacturing company, a failing operation that everyone said was beyond saving. Denise proved them all wrong. Within 18 months, that company was turning a profit, and she sold it for 3 times what she paid. At 40, Denise made the biggest move of her career. She acquired Titan Manufacturing Corp., a sprawling industrial empire worth nearly $2 billion. The previous owner was ready to retire and wanted someone who would protect his legacy. Denise convinced him that she was that person. The deal closed 6 months ago, but Denise had not yet visited the Birmingham facility in person. She had been busy integrating the company into her portfolio, reviewing financials, and meeting with investors. Then, 3 weeks ago, she received an anonymous report that changed everything. The report detailed systematic racial discrimination at the Birmingham plant. It claimed that black workers were paid 30% less than their white counterparts for identical work. It alleged that no person of color had ever been promoted to management, despite decades of qualified candidates. It described a culture of harassment, intimidation, and retaliation against anyone who dared to complain. The report was detailed, specific, and devastating. Theodore Grant, a member of the board and one of Denise's few allies, urged her to investigate personally. He suggested she arrive unannounced, dressed simply, without her usual entourage of assistants and security. He wanted her to see how the leadership treated ordinary black people when they did not know they were being watched. Denise agreed. On this cold November morning, she flew from Chicago to Birmingham on a commercial flight, rented a modest Camry instead of her usual limousine, and drove to the factory at 7 in the morning. She wore a simple camel-colored wool coat, black pants, and sensible shoes. No expensive jewelry, no designer handbag, nothing that would signal wealth or power. She wanted to be invisible. Just another black woman trying to get through the door. She wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. What she found would exceed her worst expectations and change the course of 13 lives forever. The Birmingham facility sprawled across 20 acres of industrial land, a complex of concrete and steel that had been manufacturing components for nearly 60 years. Denise pulled her rented Camry up to the main security gate at exactly 7:15 in the morning. The sky was gray and heavy with the threat of rain, and the temperature hovered around 38 degrees Fahrenheit. She could see her breath forming small clouds as she rolled down her window to speak with the guard. Frank Morrison sat in the security booth, a man of about 45 with a protruding belly that strained against his uniform shirt. He was chewing gum with his mouth open, the sound of it smacking wetly as he looked at Denise with barely concealed contempt. He did not stand up from his chair. He did not even remove his feet from the small heater under his desk. He simply glanced at her through the glass partition, his eyes traveling slowly from her face down to her modest coat, and then back up again with a smirk that made his disdain perfectly clear. "Back door is for cleaning staff," Frank said without any greeting. "Go around to the left side of the building." He waved his hand dismissively, already looking back at the newspaper spread across his desk. Denise felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. She had been underestimated her entire life. She knew how to swallow that feeling and save it for when it mattered. "I am not cleaning staff," Denise said calmly. "I need to meet with the management team." Frank looked up again, this time with his eyebrows raised in exaggerated surprise. "Oh, my mistake," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Food delivery then? Still, the back door, sweetheart." He laughed at his own joke, a dry chuckle that seemed to come from deep in his throat. Denise did not flinch. "I have an appointment," she said firmly. "I need to see Gerald Whitmore." Frank finally showed a flicker of interest. Gerald Whitmore was the plant director, the man who had run this facility for 30 years and answered to no one except the corporate headquarters. Frank flipped open a battered logbook and ran his finger down the page of scheduled visitors. His finger stopped, then continued, then stopped again. He frowned and shook his head. "No Denise Carter on the list," he announced. "You sure you got the right place? Maybe you meant the other factory, the one on Jefferson Road. They do more of the, simpler work." He emphasized the word simpler in a way that left no doubt about his meaning. Denise clenched her jaw but maintained her composure. She told Frank to call inside and verify her appointment. He sighed heavily, as if she was asking him to climb a mountain, and picked up the phone with obvious reluctance. The phone rang for what seemed like an eternity before someone answered. Frank spoke briefly, using words that Denise could not quite hear through the glass. Then he hung up and turned back to her with a look of smug satisfaction. "Mrs. Jennings says you do not have an appointment. You need to leave the premises." Denise asked who Mrs. Jennings was. Frank told her she was Mr. Whitmore's executive assistant, the gatekeeper to the executive floor. No one got to Gerald without going through Barbara first. Denise requested to speak with Barbara Jennings directly. Frank laughed again, that same dry, condescending sound. "Lady, I do not know who you think you are, but you cannot just show up here and demand to talk to executives. This is not how it works." Denise told him she would wait. She parked her car in the visitor lot and stepped out into the cold morning air, standing near the entrance where Frank could see her through his window. The minutes crawled by. 7:20, 7:30, 7:45. Denise watched the factory come alive as workers arrived for the morning shift. She noticed something immediately. The black workers entered through a side door near the loading dock, while the white workers walked through the main entrance, nodding to Frank as they passed. No one stopped the white workers to check identification. No one asked them where they were going or what business they had. They were simply waved through with friendly greetings and casual banter. At 7:50, a black Mercedes sedan pulled into the VIP parking area closest to the main entrance. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair perfectly styled and a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most workers earned in a month. Gerald Whitmore. Denise recognized him from the company photos she had studied before the acquisition. He was 58 years old, a lifelong resident of Birmingham, and the undisputed king of this industrial empire. He had been running this plant for 30 years, and in all that time, not a single person of color had ever risen above the level of floor supervisor. Gerald walked directly past Denise without acknowledging her existence. She might as well have been part of the landscaping, a shrub or a decorative rock that did not warrant even a glance. He pushed through the main doors and disappeared into the building, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne. Denise noted everything. She pulled out her phone and began typing observations into a document. The segregated entrances, the different treatment for different skin colors, the invisible wall that separated those who belonged from those who did not. She called Theodore Grant and described what she was witnessing. Theodore listened carefully and advised her to be patient. "Keep collecting evidence," he said. "The more you document now, the stronger your case will be later." Denise agreed, but patience had never been her strongest virtue. She ended the call and continued waiting, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. At 5 minutes past 8, the main doors opened again, and a woman emerged. Barbara Jennings was exactly what Denise had expected. She was in her mid-50s, with hair dyed an aggressive shade of blonde and lipstick so red it looked like she had applied it with a paint roller. Her expression was one of barely concealed irritation, as if dealing with Denise was an unforgivable interruption to her important day. She walked toward Denise with short, clipped steps, her heels clicking against the concrete like a metronome counting down to confrontation. "You are the one who called about meeting Mr. Whitmore?" Barbara asked, her eyes scanning Denise from head to toe with obvious disapproval. Denise confirmed that she was. Barbara sighed dramatically. "Mr. Whitmore is an extremely busy man. He does not take unscheduled meetings, especially not with people who just wander in off the street." Denise explained that she was interested in discussing some concerns about the facility. Barbara's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Concerns? What kind of concerns could you possibly have about our facility?" Barbara paused, then seemed to reach a conclusion that satisfied her. "Oh, I see. You are looking for employment. Well, human resources is on the first floor. But I should warn you, I do not think we are currently hiring for the type of positions that would be suitable for you. Denise asked what type of positions would be suitable for her. Barbara smiled, a cold expression that did not reach her eyes. You know, cleaning, cafeteria work, the simpler jobs. The word, simpler, again. Denise was beginning to understand the vocabulary of contempt that operated in this place. She asked again to speak with Mr. Whitmore directly. Barbara shook her head firmly. Absolutely not. Without a proper appointment and employee credentials, you cannot enter the building. Security regulations. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the entrance, clearly considering the conversation finished. Denise watched her go, filing away every word and gesture for later use. Then her phone buzzed with a text message from Theodore Grant. I just called Gerald. Told him an important investor is coming to visit. You will be allowed inside within 10 minutes. Denise smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a chess player who has just seen checkmate 5 moves ahead. 10 minutes later, exactly as Theodore had predicted, Frank Morrison received a phone call that visibly startled him. He sat up straighter in his chair, his casual arrogance evaporating as he listened to whoever was speaking on the other end. When he hung up, he hurried out of his booth and approached Denise with an expression that was trying to be respectful but could not quite conceal his confusion. Mr. Whitmore says to let you in, Frank announced, his tone considerably more polite than before. Follow the yellow line to the main lobby. Someone will meet you there. He did not apologize for making her wait in the cold for nearly an hour. He did not acknowledge that he had assumed she was a cleaning lady or a food delivery driver. The only thing that had changed was that someone important had vouched for her, and in Frank Morrison's world, that was apparently enough. Denise walked through the main entrance for the first time, her eyes taking in every detail of the lobby. The walls were lined with photographs of past leadership, formal portraits in gilded frames stretching back to the 1950s. Every single face was white and male. There were no women, no people of color, not a single hint that diversity had ever touched this place. The message was clear and deliberate. Power here belonged to a specific type of person, and everyone else was just temporary labor. The receptionist was a young woman named Megan, perhaps 24 years old, with bright red hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She looked at Denise with the same suspicious eyes that everyone else had shown, as if trying to figure out how this black woman had managed to penetrate the carefully guarded perimeter. Denise asked for a visitor badge. Megan made a phone call to confirm, speaking in hushed tones while glancing at Denise repeatedly. Finally, she printed a badge and slid it across the counter without making eye contact. Denise took the elevator to the 4th floor, the executive level. The car was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the aging factory below. 2 white men in suits stepped in at the 2nd floor, engrossed in conversation about quarterly targets. When they noticed Denise, one of them nudged the other and whispered something that made them both snicker. Denise heard the words "wrong floor" and probably lost. She said nothing, but she memorized their faces. They would learn soon enough that she had been exactly where she was supposed to be. The 4th floor was another world entirely. Plush red carpet cushioned every footstep. The walls were paneled in rich dark wood. Individual offices lined the corridor, each one occupied by people who looked remarkably similar to each other. White men in expensive suits, white women in designer dresses, all of them radiating the confidence of people who had never been questioned or challenged. Denise paused near an open office door where a conversation was happening that made her blood run cold. A man she recognized as Raymond Pike, the director of human resources, was standing over a black employee who sat with his shoulders hunched in defeat. Raymond's voice was loud enough to carry into the hallway. I do not care how long you have been here. Raymond was saying, you are not getting promoted. That is final. Some people are meant to lead, and some people are meant to follow. You should understand your place by now. The black employee, whose name badge read Curtis Washington, said nothing. His jaw was tight, and his hands were clenched in his lap. But he did not argue. He had clearly learned that arguing only made things worse. Denise pulled out her phone and pressed the record button, capturing every word while pretending to check her messages. Raymond continued his tirade for another minute before dismissing Curtis with a wave of his hand. Curtis walked out of the office with his head down, passing Denise without making eye contact. She wondered how many times he had endured conversations like that one. She wondered how many years of his life had been spent being told he was not good enough, not qualified enough, not the right kind of person for advancement. Barbara Jennings appeared at the end of the hallway, her expression still sour. "Mr. Whitmore will see you now," she announced. "But he only has a few minutes, so make it quick." She led Denise to a waiting area outside Gerald's office, but instead of directing her to the comfortable leather sofa reserved for important guests, she pointed to a row of plastic chairs in the corner. "Wait here," Barbara said curtly before disappearing back into the maze of offices. Denise sat down and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Through the open door of Gerald's office, she could hear him laughing and chatting with someone. The conversation casual and unhurried. Finally, the door opened fully, and a white man in his 60s emerged, shaking Gerald's hand enthusiastically. Gerald clapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends. "Bob, it was wonderful seeing you," Gerald said warmly. "We will have to do this again soon. How about next Saturday at the club? I will reserve our usual tea time." Bob agreed heartily, and they exchanged a few more pleasantries before Bob finally departed. Only then did Gerald turn his attention to Denise, his welcoming smile fading into a puzzled frown. "Barbara, who is this?" Gerald asked, not bothering to address Denise directly. Barbara materialized from somewhere and explained that this was the woman who had insisted on a meeting. Gerald sighed heavily, the sound of a man whose valuable time was being wasted by people who did not matter. "Fine," he said. "Come in. But I only have 5 minutes." He turned and walked into his office without waiting for her to respond. Denise followed, her eyes immediately drawn to a framed photograph on the wall. It was an old picture, dated from the 1970s, showing a group of men gathered around a conference table. Behind them hung a banner with words that made Denise's stomach turn. The slogan was racist, explicit, and proudly displayed. Gerald Whitmore had kept it on his wall for 50 years, a monument to the values that had always guided this place. Gerald Whitmore's office was exactly what Denise had expected from a man who had ruled this industrial kingdom for 3 decades. It sprawled across 600 square feet of prime real estate on the executive floor, filled with dark oak furniture that gleamed with expensive polish. Golf trophies lined one shelf, each one representing a victory at exclusive country clubs that had probably never admitted a black member. Family photographs decorated his desk, showing generations of Whitmores at weddings, graduations, and holiday gatherings, all of them sharing the same pale skin and privileged smiles. Gerald did not offer Denise a seat. He settled into his own leather chair behind the massive desk and looked at her with the impatience of a man who was already counting down the seconds until she would leave. "So," he began, "what exactly do you want? Who are you?" His tone made it clear that he considered both questions rhetorical, that whoever she was and whatever she wanted could not possibly be important enough to justify this intrusion. Denise remained standing, her posture straight, and her expression calm. "I am interested in learning about how this facility operates," she said. "I have some concerns about certain practices here." Gerald's eyebrows rose slightly, and for a moment he studied her with something that might have been curiosity if it were not so obviously disdain. "Concerns," he repeated. Are you some kind of journalist? We do not speak to press without prior approval from corporate communications. If you are writing some hit piece about manufacturing or labor conditions, you can take it somewhere else. Denise told him she was not a journalist. She explained that she was simply someone with a legitimate interest in how the company was being run. Gerald laughed, a short bark of disbelief. You have an interest in how we run things? And who exactly are you to have an interest in my company? The possessive pronoun hung in the air between them. My company. Not the shareholders' company. Not Titan Manufacturing's company. His company. Denise filed that away for later. I am someone with the right to ask questions. Denise replied evenly. Gerald's expression hardened. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing. Listen, I do not know where you came from or what you think you are doing here, but I have been running this plant for 30 years. 30 years. I do not need anyone coming in here to question me, especially not someone who has no standing, no credentials, and frankly, no business being on this floor. He paused, seeming to catch himself before finishing the thought. Denise waited a beat, then asked, especially not who? Mr. Whitmore. Gerald shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Especially not someone without proper authorization, he finished lamely. But they both knew what he had almost said. Especially not a black woman who wandered in off the street. Denise decided to push further. I have heard that this facility has some issues with diversity, she said. That there might be some disparities in how different employees are treated. Gerald's face flushed red with sudden anger. Issues with diversity? We have plenty of diversity here. We employ lots of people from different backgrounds. He stumbled over the words, clearly uncomfortable with the terminology. How many black employees are in management positions? Denise asked. Gerald waved his hand dismissively. I do not have those numbers memorized. We hire based on qualifications, not skin color. Denise nodded slowly. I checked the records, she said. The answer is 0. Not a single black manager in 60 years of operation. Gerald's flush deepened. You checked the records? How did you access company records? Who gave you that authority? Denise did not answer the question. Instead, she pressed on. I also noticed that black workers earn about 28% less than white workers doing the same jobs. And there have been 47 complaints about discrimination in the past 2 years, none of which resulted in any action. Gerald stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall. I do not know who you think you are, he snarled, but you have no right to come into my office and make these accusations. This company has been in operation since before you were born. We built something here, something valuable, and I will not have it torn apart by some outsider with an agenda. At that moment, Gerald's desk phone rang with an urgent tone. He grabbed it, his face still flushed with anger, and barked a greeting. As he listened, the color drained from his face, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. He murmured a few responses that Denise could not quite hear, then hung up and stood frozen for a long moment. What is it? Denise asked, though she already knew. Gerald did not look at her. There is an emergency meeting, he said, his voice strangely flat. The CEO of Titan Manufacturing is apparently in the building. All department heads are being summoned to the main conference room immediately. He reached for his intercom and pressed the button with a trembling finger. Barbara, get everyone to conference room A. Now, the CEO is here. Gerald finally turned to Denise, his earlier aggression replaced by barely controlled panic. You need to leave, he said. This is a confidential corporate meeting. You cannot be here. Denise smiled, and for the first time since entering his office, she felt genuinely at ease. Actually, she said, I think I should stay. Gerald stared at her, as if she had lost her mind. Are you insane? Security will remove you. This is not a game. He moved toward the door, ready to call for Frank Morrison or whoever else could physically escort this troublesome woman out of his building. But Denise remained exactly where she was, completely unperturbed. Now, I have a question for you, the viewer. Do you think Denise should reveal who she really is right now? Or should she wait until the meeting to expose everyone at once? If you think she should drop the bomb immediately, comment number 1 below. If you think she should wait for maximum impact, comment number 2. Either way, hit that like button, because this story is about to take a turn that nobody saw coming. And make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what happens next. Now, what do you think Gerald will do when he discovers the truth about the woman he tried to throw out of his own building? Frank Morrison appeared in the doorway of Gerald's office within seconds of being summoned. He had clearly run up from the security station, slightly out of breath and eager to demonstrate his usefulness to the executives. He looked at Denise with a mixture of confusion and satisfaction, as if pleased to finally have permission to remove this persistent woman who had disrupted his peaceful morning. "Escort her out," Gerald commanded, gesturing toward Denise with a dismissive wave. "She does not have authorization to be here, and we have important business to attend to." Frank stepped forward, reaching toward Denise's arm with the confidence of a man who had removed unwanted visitors many times before. Denise spoke without raising her voice, but something in her tone made Frank hesitate. "I would strongly advise you not to touch me," she said. Frank paused, his hand still extended, uncertain how to proceed. He looked back at Gerald for guidance, but Gerald was already focused on gathering papers from his desk, preparing for the emergency meeting. Denise pulled out her phone and dialed a number. She pressed the speaker button and held the device between herself and Gerald. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Denise, is everything all right there?" Theodore Grant's voice filled the room, immediately recognizable to Gerald, who froze mid-motion. "Everything is fine, Theodore," Denise replied calmly. "I am currently in Mr. Whitmore's office. The security guard is attempting to remove me from the premises." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Theodore responded. "Is Gerald there? Can he hear me?" Gerald stepped closer to the phone, his face a mask of confusion. "Theodore? Mr. Grant? What is going on?" Theodore's voice took on a tone of patient explanation, as if speaking to a child who had made a serious mistake without realizing it. "Gerald, I need you to listen very carefully. The woman standing in front of you is Denise Carter." The name seemed to register slowly in Gerald's mind. His brow furrowed as he tried to place it. "Denise Carter? That name sounds familiar, but I cannot recall where I have heard it," Theodore continued, his voice growing more serious. "Denise Carter is the Chief Executive Officer of Titan Manufacturing Corporation. She is your boss, Gerald. She owns this company." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Gerald's face went through a rapid series of transformations, from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. His mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound. Frank Morrison, still standing in the doorway with his hand half extended, looked as if he had been turned to stone. "That is impossible," Gerald finally managed to say. "The CEO is," I thought. He could not finish the sentence, could not articulate what he had assumed without revealing the prejudice that had shaped his assumptions. Denise finished it for him. "You thought the CEO would be a white man," she said. "You never bothered to look up a photograph because you already knew what a CEO was supposed to look like." Gerald shook his head rapidly, as if he could somehow deny the reality that was crashing down around him. "No, that is not. I mean, we were never sent any official notification. Corporate never informed us who the new ownership would." He trailed off, recognizing how weak his excuses sounded. Denise ended the call with Theodore and pocketed her phone. "I intentionally kept my identity private during the transition," she explained. I wanted to see how this facility operated when leadership did not know they were being watched. I wanted to understand how you treated ordinary black people when you thought no one important was paying attention. She took a step closer to Gerald, who instinctively stepped back. Now I know. Barbara Jennings had materialized in the doorway behind Frank. Drawn by the commotion, her face had lost its earlier smugness, replaced by an expression of dawning comprehension and fear. Denise turned to acknowledge her. "Ah, Mrs. Jennings, the woman who suggested I apply for a cleaning position, who told me that there were certain jobs that would be more suitable for someone like me." Barbara's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked desperately at Gerald for rescue. But Gerald was in no position to save anyone, least of all himself. He was still processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed, calculating the damage that had already been done to his career and reputation. Denise addressed the room with quiet authority. "I still want that meeting with the department heads. In conference room A. In 10 minutes. She turned to Gerald, who seemed to have aged several years in the past few minutes. "You will call everyone together. All the directors, all the senior managers. I also want Curtis Washington present." Gerald blinked in confusion. "Curtis Washington? Who is that?" Denise reminded him. "The black employee that Mr. Pike was berating this morning. The one who was told he would never be promoted. The one who has been with this company for 12 years without ever being given the opportunity he deserves." Gerald's face fell even further as he realized just how much Denise had witnessed during her morning at the facility. "You heard that?" he asked weakly. Denise nodded. "I heard and saw many things today, Mr. Whitmore. More than you can possibly imagine." She walked past Gerald, past Barbara, past the still frozen Frank Morrison, and made her way toward the conference room. Behind her, she could hear Gerald's panicked voice on the intercom, summoning his leadership team to what would be the most consequential meeting of their careers. Conference room A occupied a prime corner of the 4th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling factory complex below. A long oak table dominated the space, surrounded by 14 high-backed leather chairs, each one reserved for the executives who controlled the fate of hundreds of workers. A large presentation screen covered one wall, currently dark and waiting. Within 10 minutes of Gerald's urgent summons, the room began to fill with anxious faces. Raymond Pike arrived first, his forehead already glistening with perspiration despite the comfortable temperature. He was followed by Stuart Collins, the chief financial officer, whose nervous hands could not stop fidgeting with his pen. Patricia Newman, the director of production, entered with a measured calm that set her apart from her colleagues. Victor Hansen from marketing kept checking his phone every few seconds, as if hoping for an escape route to materialize on the screen. Barbara Jennings positioned herself in a corner of the room, trying to make herself invisible while still observing everything. 5 additional mid-level managers filed in and took their seats at the far end of the table, their expressions ranging from curious to terrified. And at the very end, looking uncomfortable and out of place among so much executive power, sat Curtis Washington. He had been pulled from his workstation without explanation, and clearly had no idea why he had been summoned to a meeting with people who normally pretended he did not exist. When Denise entered the room, everyone rose to their feet. It was an instinctive gesture of respect, though many of them still seemed uncertain about who exactly they were respecting. Gerald had managed to compose himself enough to make introductions, though his voice cracked slightly as he presented the CEO of Titan Manufacturing Corporation. The name rippled through the room like a shockwave, leaving pale faces and wide eyes in its wake. Denise took her place at the head of the table and gestured for everyone to sit. No one could meet her eyes directly. They studied the polished surface of the table, the patterns in the carpet, the view through the windows, anything to avoid confronting the woman they had so thoroughly misjudged. This morning, Denise began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I arrived at this facility as an ordinary black woman. I wanted to understand how this company treated people who looked like me when no one important was watching. I would like to share what I experienced. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled executives. She recounted every incident in methodical detail. Frank Morrison at the security gate, assuming she was cleaning staff or food delivery. Barbara Jennings suggesting she apply for menial positions. Gerald Whitmore saying she had no right to question him, especially not someone like her. The two employees in the elevator who laughed about her being on the wrong floor. Raymond Pike's brutal dismissal of Curtis Washington's promotion hopes. With each revelation, Denise looked directly at the person responsible, forcing them to confront their own behavior in front of their peers. Raymond Pike attempted to defend himself when Denise described what she had witnessed outside his office. The decision about Washington was not based on race, he insisted, his voice tight with desperation. He simply lacked the necessary qualifications for advancement. Denise had anticipated this excuse. Mr. Washington holds an MBA from the University of Alabama, she said. He has 12 years of experience at this facility, consistently excellent performance reviews, and multiple commendations for innovation that saved the company significant money. She paused to let those facts sink in. Last month, Kevin Miller was promoted to a management position. He has 4 years of experience, no advanced degree, and 2 written warnings for tardiness. Can you explain the basis for that decision? Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had no explanation that would not incriminate him further. Curtis Washington, at the far end of the table, stared at Denise with an expression of stunned disbelief. No one had ever stood up for him like this. No one had ever spoken the truth about what happened in this building. Denise opened her laptop and connected it to the presentation screen. The first slide appeared, displaying human resources statistics that painted a damning picture. 45% of the factory workforce was black, but 0% of senior management came from that demographic. Only 3% of middle management positions were held by people of color. The disparity was not subtle or ambiguous. It was systematic exclusion, documented in the company's own records. The second slide showed compensation data. Black workers earned an average of 28% less than white workers performing identical jobs with identical qualifications. The gap had persisted for decades, never addressed, never questioned. The third slide listed 47 formal complaints about discrimination filed in the past 2 years. Next to each complaint was a single word indicating the outcome: dismissed, dismissed, dismissed. Not a single complaint had resulted in any corrective action. The fourth slide was the most devastating of all. It displayed email correspondence that had been forwarded to Denise anonymously. An exchange between Raymond Pike and Gerald Whitmore, discussing hiring practices. Raymond had written that they needed to keep the number of them to a minimum in leadership positions. Gerald had replied with agreement, emphasizing the importance of maintaining traditions. The words hung on the screen, impossible to deny or explain away. Stuart Collins suddenly stood up, his face pale and sweating. "I need to use the restroom," he announced, already moving toward the door. Denise's voice stopped him cold. "Sit down, Mr. Collins. I have not yet discussed the financial matters." Stuart Collins sank back into his chair like a man who had just received a terminal diagnosis. His eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, for escape routes, for any possibility of salvation. He found none. Every other executive was too focused on their own survival to offer help. Denise turned her attention to the chief financial officer, with the precision of a surgeon preparing to make an incision. "Mr. Collins, Perhaps you can explain a line item I discovered in last year's budget. $250,000 allocated to diversity consulting services. She paused, watching his face carefully. According to the records, that money was paid to a firm called Collins Family Consulting. Can you tell me about the work they performed? Stewart's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. They provided guidance on inclusive hiring practices and workplace culture assessment. Denise nodded thoughtfully. Interesting. Because Collins Family Consulting is registered to an address that happens to be your wife's home office. And when I contacted the Alabama Secretary of State, I learned that your wife is the sole proprietor of that firm. She let that information settle. I also found no evidence that any consulting work was ever actually performed. No reports, no recommendations, no training sessions, nothing. The room had gone completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the factory below seemed to have faded away, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Gerald Whitmore stared at Stewart with a mixture of horror and betrayal, realizing that corruption had been flourishing right under his nose. But Denise was not finished. "There is more," she continued. 7 months ago, 7 black employees were terminated as part of what was described as a budget reduction initiative. They were told the company could not afford to keep them. She pulled up another slide showing payroll records. That same month, the executive leadership team received bonuses totaling $1,200,000. The company claimed it could not pay workers earning $15 an hour, but it found plenty of money to reward executives. Raymond Pike tried to interject. Those bonuses were performance-based, tied to meeting operational targets. Denise cut him off. What performance? Profits declined 15% last year. Revenue dropped. Customer satisfaction scores fell. The only metrics that improved were executive compensation. She shook her head slowly. You did not earn those bonuses. You took them from workers who needed that money far more than any of you. She turned to address the room more broadly. But financial misconduct is only part of the problem here. There is also the matter of how this company treats employees who try to do the right thing. She walked to the door and opened it, gesturing for someone waiting in the hallway to enter. Elena Rodriguez stepped into the conference room, visibly nervous but determined. She was young, perhaps 28, with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood before the assembled executives, most of whom had never bothered to learn her name despite years of working in the same building. "Miss Rodriguez," Denise said gently, "would you please tell everyone what happened when you reported workplace misconduct?" Elena swallowed hard and began to speak. She described witnessing Raymond Pike use racial slurs when addressing a black colleague. She had followed proper procedures, filing a formal complaint with Human Resources. Within a week, she had been transferred from her marketing position to a warehouse assignment. Her salary was cut by 40%. When she asked for an explanation, she was told it was organizational restructuring, nothing personal. Raymond Pike erupted from his seat. "She is lying. None of that ever happened. This is a coordinated attack on my reputation." Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I recorded the conversation where you used those words," she said quietly. "I also recorded the meeting where you told me my transfer was punishment for causing trouble." The room fell silent as Elena pressed play. Raymond Pike's voice emerged from the tiny speaker, clear and unmistakable, using language that had no place in any workplace, followed by explicit threats about what happened to employees who did not know when to keep their mouths shut. By the time the recording ended, Raymond had collapsed back into his chair, all the fight drained from his body. Denise thanked Elena for her courage and allowed her to leave. Then she turned to Curtis Washington, who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout the entire meeting. "Mr. Washington, is there anything you would like to add to this discussion?" Curtis hesitated, years of conditioning telling him to stay quiet. to avoid making waves, to protect whatever small security he had managed to build. But something had changed in this room. For the first time in his career, someone with power was asking for his truth. "I have worked here for 12 years," Curtis began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "I have applied for promotion 9 times. Every single time, the position went to someone with less experience, less education, and worse performance reviews than me. Every single time, that person was white." He took a deep breath. "Last year, Mr. Whitmore told me I needed to understand my place. He said there were certain things that were not meant for people like me. He said it right in the cafeteria, in front of witnesses." Gerald Whitmore shook his head vigorously. "I never said anything like that. He is misremembering." Curtis met his gaze directly, perhaps for the first time ever. "You said it on October 14th, at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon. James Henderson, Maria Gonzalez, and Thomas Brown were all present. They heard every word." Denise made a note. "I will need to speak with those witnesses." She looked around the room at the faces of people who had built careers on exploitation and discrimination. "I have heard and seen enough. It is time for decisions." Gerald Whitmore rose from his chair, his face contorted with rage and desperation. His fist came down on the conference table with a force that rattled the coffee cups and made several people jump in their seats. "Enough!" he shouted. "You cannot come in here and destroy everything I have built. 30 years of my life went into this facility. You have no idea what it takes to run an operation like this." Denise remained seated, completely unmoved by his outburst. Her calm demeanor only seemed to infuriate Gerald further. She waited until his breathing slowed before responding. 30 years, she repeated. "You mention that number, as if it should impress me. But what exactly have you built in those 30 years, Mr. Whitmore?" She stood and began to walk slowly around the conference table, making eye contact with each person as she passed. "You built a system where black workers are paid significantly less than their white colleagues for doing the exact same jobs. You built a culture where qualified people are denied advancement because of the color of their skin. You built an environment where employees are called racial slurs by their supervisors. You built a place where anyone who speaks up about injustice is punished and silenced." She stopped directly behind Gerald's chair. "You built a company where the CEO, a black woman who owns this entire operation, is mistaken for cleaning staff and told to wait outside in the cold. That is what you built, Mr. Whitmore. That is your legacy after 30 years. Gerald spun around to face her. "Those were misunderstandings. We did not know who you were. If we had known, things would have been different." Denise nodded slowly. "Exactly. If you had known I was wealthy and powerful, you would have treated me with respect. But when you thought I was just another black woman, with no connections and no importance, you showed me who you really are. That is the problem, Mr. Whitmore. Your courtesy depends on status, not basic human decency." She returned to the head of the table and opened a folder she had brought with her. "I have made my decisions," she announced. "These are effective immediately." The room held its collective breath as Denise began to read from her document. "Gerald Whitmore, Director of Operations. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building within the hour. You will receive no severance and will be barred from any future employment with any company under my ownership." Gerald sputtered in protest, but Denise continued without pause. "Raymond Pike, Director of Human Resources. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Additionally, your conduct will be referred to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for investigation of civil rights violations." Raymond's face went gray. "You cannot do this. I have a contract. My lawyers will." Denise cut him off. Your contract contains a morality clause that specifically prohibits discriminatory behavior. The recordings we heard today constitute clear violations. Your lawyers are welcome to review the documentation I will be providing." She moved to the next name on her list. Stuart Collins, Chief Financial Officer. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, the financial irregularities discovered in your department will be referred to federal authorities for investigation of potential fraud charges. Stuart slumped in his chair, all color drained from his face. Barbara Jennings, Executive Assistant. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Barbara, who had been trying to make herself invisible in the corner, let out a small sob. Victor Hansen, Director of Marketing. You are suspended pending investigation of your knowledge of and participation in discriminatory practices. Denise continued down her list, naming 5 more mid-level managers who had been complicit in the culture of discrimination. By the time she finished, 13 people had been removed from their positions. The survivors sat in stunned silence, wondering if they would be next. Then Denise looked at Patricia Newman, the Director of Production, who had been silent throughout the meeting. "Mrs. Newman, you are the only member of this leadership team whose record shows any attempt to address these issues. According to the files I reviewed, you proposed diversity initiatives 3 times, and each time you were overruled." Patricia nodded cautiously. "I tried to make changes, but I was told they were unnecessary and would disrupt established procedures." Denise studied her for a moment. "You will serve as interim plant director while I restructure the leadership team. I expect a complete assessment of operations on my desk within 2 weeks." Gerald made one last desperate attempt to save himself. "You cannot terminate all of us without board approval. The shareholders will revolt. This is corporate suicide." Denise allowed herself a small smile. "I own 67% of the shares. Theodore Grant owns another 15%. Together, we control the company absolutely. The board will do what I tell them to do." Gerald looked around the room, searching for anyone who might stand with him. He found only averted eyes and bowed heads. 30 years of power had evaporated in a single morning. Denise picked up the phone on the conference table and dialed security. "Send 2 officers to conference room A," she said. "We have several former employees who need to be escorted out of the building." She hung up and addressed the terminated executives one final time. "You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings. You will be accompanied by security at all times. Any attempt to access company files, remove documents, or contact employees will result in immediate legal action." The door opened, and 2 security officers entered. Gerald Whitmore, Raymond Pike, Stuart Collins, Barbara Jennings, and the others rose from their seats and walked toward the exit like condemned prisoners heading to their cells. As Gerald passed Denise, he paused and looked at her with pure hatred. "This is not over," he said quietly. "You will regret this." Denise met his gaze without flinching. "No, Mr. Whitmore. The only thing I regret is that I did not come here sooner." She nodded to the security officers. "Please escort these individuals out." The conference room emptied slowly as the terminated executives were led away, leaving behind only the faint scent of fear and the debris of shattered careers. Denise stood at the window, watching the factory floor below where hundreds of workers continued their shifts, unaware that their world had just been turned upside down. Soon they would learn. Soon everything would be different. Her phone buzzed with a call from Theodore Grant. "It is done," she told him. 13 terminations. Patricia Newman will serve as interim director. Theodore's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "You handled it perfectly, Denise. The board will have questions, but the evidence is overwhelming. No one will second-guess your decisions." Denise thanked him and ended the call. She needed a moment alone to process everything that had happened, everything that still needed to happen. The real work of rebuilding this company was just beginning. It would take years to undo the damage that decades of discrimination had caused. But she was committed to the task. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Curtis Washington stood in the doorway, looking uncertain about whether he was allowed to enter. Denise waved him in. "Mr. Washington, please, come in." Curtis approached slowly, still processing the extraordinary events he had witnessed. "Mrs. Carter, I do not know what to say. In 12 years, no one has ever." He trailed off, unable to find words adequate to express his emotions. "No one has ever treated you fairly." Denise finished for him. "No one has ever acknowledged your worth or given you the opportunities you deserved." "I understand, Mr. Washington. I understand better than you might imagine." She gestured for him to sit down. "Tell me about yourself. Not the version from your personnel file. The real you." Curtis talked for nearly 20 minutes. He told her about growing up in rural Alabama, about being the first person in his family to attend college, about his dreams of running a manufacturing operation someday. He described the slow erosion of hope that came from years of rejection and dismissal, the way he had learned to make himself small and invisible just to survive in this environment. When he finished, Denise made him an offer that nearly stopped his heart. "I need a new director of human resources," she said. "Someone who understands what the workers in this facility have experienced. Someone who will ensure that no one else has to endure what you have endured. I would like you to take that position." Curtis stared at her in disbelief. "Me? But I do not have experience in HR. I am a production supervisor. I would not know where to begin." Denise smiled. "You have something more valuable than HR experience, Mr. Washington. You have 12 years of watching what does not work. You know exactly what needs to change. I will provide you with training and support. What I cannot teach is the perspective that comes from lived experience. That you already have." Curtis was still struggling to respond when another knock came at the door. Elena Rodriguez appeared, looking hesitant. "Mrs. Carter, there is someone in the lobby asking to see you." An older woman. She says her name is Hattie Mae Johnson. The name meant nothing to Denise, but something in Elena's expression suggested this visitor was important. She told Elena to bring the woman up. A few minutes later, an elderly black woman entered the conference room. She was perhaps 75 years old, with silver hair and deep lines that spoke of a long life filled with both joy and sorrow. She walked slowly but with dignity, her eyes taking in the room before settling on Denise. "You are Denise Carter?" the woman asked. Her voice was soft but clear. Denise confirmed that she was. The woman nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. "My name is Hattie Mae Johnson. I worked at this plant 40 years ago." Something in her tone made Denise pay close attention. "What happened 40 years ago?" "Mrs. Johnson." Hattie lowered herself into a chair with the careful movements of someone whose body no longer cooperated as it once did. "In 1983, I was a line supervisor here. One of the only black supervisors in the whole facility. Then Gerald Whitmore, who was a middle manager at the time, decided he wanted something from me that I was not willing to give." She paused, and decades of pain flickered across her face. "When I refused him, he made my life impossible. He sabotaged my work, spread rumors about me, filed false complaints. Eventually, I was fired for what they called poor performance. He told me I needed to know my place, that there were certain things that were not meant for people like me." Denise felt a chill run down her spine. Those were almost exactly the words Curtis had quoted from his encounter with Gerald last year. The language of oppression had not changed in 40 years. Hattie continued her story. "I watched Gerald rise through the ranks after that. I watched him become the king of this place, untouchable and unaccountable. I never stopped paying attention." She reached into her purse, and pulled out a worn envelope. When I heard that a black woman had bought Titan Manufacturing, I knew my time had finally come. Denise suddenly understood. The anonymous report, the one that detailed all the discrimination and misconduct. That was you. Hattie shook her head. Not exactly. I am too old for that kind of investigation. But my daughter Gloria works in the accounting department here. She has been collecting evidence for 2 years, documenting every violation, every discrepancy, every act of discrimination she witnessed or heard about. She is the one who put together that report. Gloria Johnson. Denise remembered seeing that name in the personnel files. A quiet, diligent employee in accounting who had never once been promoted despite excellent performance reviews. Of course, Denise reached out and took Hattie's weathered hands in her own. Mrs. Johnson, I just removed Gerald Whitmore from this company. He will never hurt anyone here again. Tears welled up in Hattie's eyes, but she blinked them back with the practiced control of someone who had learned long ago not to show weakness. 40 years, she whispered. I waited 40 years to see that man face justice. Denise made a decision in that moment. I am establishing a scholarship fund for the children of factory workers, she announced. It will provide full college tuition for any qualified applicant, and I am naming it the Hattie Mae Johnson Scholarship, in honor of a woman who refused to be silenced. Hattie finally allowed the tears to fall, decades of pain and hope mingling on her weathered cheeks. Later that afternoon, Denise walked out of the factory for the first time since arriving that morning. The sun was setting, painting the Alabama sky in shades of orange and gold. She paused at the main entrance, the same door where she had been denied access just hours earlier. Frank Morrison was nowhere to be seen. His employment had been terminated along with the others. As she walked to her rental car, she saw Hattie Mae Johnson standing near the gate, watching her. The old woman raised her hand, in a gesture that was part wave, part salute. Denise returned it, feeling a connection that spanned generations of struggle and perseverance. She got into the car and turned on the radio. A news bulletin was already reporting the story. Breaking news from Birmingham, where Titan Manufacturing has announced the immediate termination of 13 senior executives following revelations of systematic racial discrimination. Company CEO Denise Carter issued a statement calling the actions necessary to protect workers and ensure a culture of equity. Denise turned off the radio and called her mother in Chicago. Lorraine Carter answered on the second ring. Baby girl, I saw the news. I am so proud of you I could burst. Denise felt tears prick at her eyes, the emotion of the day finally catching up with her. I learned from the best, Mama. You taught me to never back down, never accept less than I deserve. That is right, Lorraine said. And do not you ever forget it. Now go get some rest. You have got a company to rebuild. Denise ended the call and put the car in drive. As she pulled away from the factory, she looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Hattie Mae Johnson was still standing at the gate, watching her go. 40 years of injustice had finally been addressed. 40 years of waiting had finally ended, and a new chapter was just beginning. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of Denise's decision to fire all 13 members of the management team? Do you believe she did the right thing? Or should she have given some of them a second chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear that justice is possible. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. And remember that no matter where you come from or what obstacles you face, you have the power to change your circumstances. Until next time, stay strong and keep believing in yourself. This powerful story teaches us several important lessons that we should carry with us throughout our lives. First, never judge a person by their appearance. Gerald Whitmore and his team made the fatal mistake of assuming that a black woman in simple clothes could not possibly be anyone important. Their prejudice blinded them to reality, and ultimately cost them their careers. The security guard, the receptionist, the executives, they all looked at Denise and saw what they expected to see, rather than who she actually was. Second, injustice may persist for years, but accountability eventually arrives. Hattie Mae Johnson waited 40 years for the man who wronged her to face consequences. Her patience and persistence, combined with her daughter's courage in gathering evidence, finally brought about the change she had dreamed of for decades. Justice moves slowly, but it does move. Third, true leadership means standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Denise did not have to visit that factory personally. She could have sent investigators or lawyers to handle the situation. Instead, she chose to experience firsthand what her workers endured every day. That choice gave her the moral authority to make sweeping changes. Fourth, silence enables oppression. For years, people witnessed discrimination at this facility but said nothing. Elena Rodriguez and Gloria Johnson broke that silence, and their bravery made justice possible. Finally, your past does not determine your future. Denise came from poverty and hardship, yet she built an empire and used her power to protect others. What would you have done in Dennis's position? Would you have fired everyone immediately? Or would you have given them another chance? Drop your answer in the comments below. If this story moved you, smash that like button and share it with friends and family who need to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that inspire and empower. Thank you for being part of our community. We appreciate every single one of you. May you always have the courage to stand up against injustice, and the wisdom to see people for who they truly are, not what they appear to be. Stay blessed and stay strong.